Darren Edwards, welcome to the Graft podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I always make notes, but I've been bamboozled this morning because I took a photo shot. So my notes say, Darren Edwards, climber, mountaineer, have climbed in the Alps in the UK, Army reservist and SAS reservist. However, on your webpage, this sounds way better, by the way, the world's leading adaptive adventurer, international keynote speaker, record-breaking explorer and best-selling author.
Yeah. I'm not sure I've ever called myself those four things in a sentence, but for the sake of a website where it's like your CV,
you can't put average bloke,
exactly,
can you? Otherwise, yeah. So welcome to the Graft podcast, Darren. It's brilliant to have you here. Let's start there because it's a fairly active title of kind of who you are and what you do. You've always been very keen and great outdoors and climbing and mountaineering. Where did that begin and where did that come from?
Yeah, so not necessarily from the very beginning. I've not been, raised by a family that are kind of like mountaineers or explorers or adventurers. We were saying before we started recording that, I grew up in London. So for me, it was a very urban sort of childhood, urban adolescence. Then one day my family announced that because of, something that happened in my school, that we were moving to a place called Shrewsbury, which I'd never heard of, in a county called Shropshire, I'd never heard of. And all of a sudden, we'd gone from the only thing I ever knew, which was kind of city life, and the only thing I could see in my future was staying in London, to moving to the countryside, very slow pace of life. But it was actually that move that kind of opened my eyes to the world that I just didn't really knew existed before that point.
Yeah.
And it was going to college. So Shrewsbury, one of these towns where you do your secondary school and then like 4 or 5 schools get thrown into the same sixth form. So you kind of have this opportunity to reinvent yourself. You meet a lot of new people that you've maybe not crossed paths with before. And I ended up meeting the guy that would become my best friend and the guy that would one day save my life on the day that I sustained my injury. And we were like playing football down at the park, and he literally we were just playing football. He came over to me and he went, "Mate, have you heard of this guy called Bear Grylls?" And I was like, "No, don't know who you're on about, who he is, kind of thing." And he was like, "Right, come over to my house after school. We're going to watch a DVD." So I go over to Matt's house after school. He puts on this DVD of Bear Grylls in, I think it was Scotland, and it was like one of his first ever episodes. And he was like sleeping in a sheep that he's like skinned and used the rug for a sleeping bag. He's trekking over these mountains, jumping off these waterfalls. And Matt just looked at me and went, "I've just passed my driving test. Let's go to Snowdonia, North Wales, and let's do a version of that." And I was a little bit like, okay, yeah, I like this guy. Let's see how it goes. And then I will never forget that first trip where, I hiked up a mountain for the first time. We hiked up Snowdon, which is a beautiful mountain, not hard to hike up, but we did it in winter. We come off the back of Snowdon. We make a camp out of like sticks and downed logs that at like 1 a.m. in the morning, it starts absolutely hammering it down. And we're like underneath this really shit shelter, just getting pissed wet through. And
you guys are like fucking Bear Grylls.
And the next, as soon as it's light, we start hiking like back to the car for 4 or 5 hours. We're both shivering. We get back to his like banged up Clio that I think was like a rite of passage for a lot of people, and like your first car, and loved it. Like, shivering, cold, hadn't slept, knackered, but I'd never felt more alive.
You're alive. Yeah.
And it was just the first of like the start of a real beautiful like friendship that became a best friendship. And it was me and him versus the world, climbed around the world together. And I think I created a new identity because of that friendship, where adventure, exploration, and just pushing yourself out of your comfort zone was the thing that kind of was that buzz, was that was that feeling that you chased. And I think in climbing, I found something that, we were talking outside before we started recording, at school I was average. You kind of, said something similar for yourself.
Yeah.
So I never excelled at anything. And I always thought that life was a competition with other people. Whereas in climbing and mountaineering, your only competition was you. It was your mindset and your self-doubt and fear. And, can you push past that, and can you fail, fall off, and just look back up at it from the bottom and kind of go, right, here we go, and go again. So
yeah, wow. What was that feeling like of like that? The way you explain that, Darren, there is a kind of an exposure in those sort of environments. And I've done a couple of, I did the 3 Peaks, 24 hours. I've done a few things when we were, part of like boys' brigades and things like that. I get what you're saying about that buzz. It's kind of like you versus the elements. My friends think I'm weird that I like cycling, and I love it when it's uphill. That burn, that kind of like when it's not great conditions. Get out there, because it's then you against everything, rather than, as you quite rightly say, maybe in a team sport, you've kind of got a direct competitor, haven't you? But
for sure.
Was that how you felt about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of realising that you're tougher than you perhaps think you are, that you can bear discomfort and you can bear the pain and push through it. And I think maybe it's because both of us didn't excel at anything, that in sport and adventure or cycling or climbing, we found our thing that we could. You're not defined by whether you're an A-star student or world class. You're defined by like, this is a hill, I'm going to push myself to the top of it, or this is a steep climb, I'm going to learn to get to the top of that. And actually, because we weren't spectacular at school or academically, we've probably learned to do the hard miles, and we've learned that through struggle, you can still overcome. And I think for me in mountaineering, like that, you look at a mountain, it's the perfect analogy for life. You set foot at the very beginning, you don't know whether you're going to get to the top or not. You don't know what adverse conditions you're going to face, the weather, the wind, the difficulty of the terrain itself. And you just, it's one step at a time. Success is built one step at a time. And I think for me, that's what I learned in the mountains. And that is probably what led to some of the stuff we'll talk about with the SAS Reserve. And then even now, breaking down these big kind of expeditions that are completely like overwhelming at the start and just breaking it down into the next step.
A big part today is about resilience. I will just go on record, by the way, to say that at school I excelled at being the class clown and finding the best place to smoke fags. I was fucking brilliant at that. Just wanted to put that out there. An immense amount of exposure to the great outdoors, adventure, hiking, climbing. 2017, that changed though. You had a life-changing accident. Talk us through what happened.
Yeah. So I think life, is fair to say, was headed in a good direction. I just started, I was always chasing like purpose. So becoming a teacher was like part of sharing a passion with others. So like a passion for history, the only subject I was ever any good at. And I kind of was on the right track with that. I was like, right, I found my career. I had the mountains as my passion. I'd gone through selection and training with the SAS Reserve as kind of like trying to find your tribe and trying to find those people that think and act and aspire to things that are like pretty tough. So kind of like life was on a good track. And on a really beautiful summer's day, me and Matt, so by this point we'd been best friends for 10 years, climbed around the world for 10 years. And we headed to a rock face we were choosing between two places that day. And it's kind of one of those Gwyneth Paltrow sliding doors references where had we gone to the other one, I would be on that first track and my life would look quite predictable, I'd imagine. But we didn't choose that place. We chose the other place. So the first place was called Trevor, which is just a bloke's name, but it is a rock face. The place we went to is called World's End. So like a brilliant place to have a life-changing injury. Because if I'd broken my back on Trevor, it would sound
not
like
the same story,
something completely different. But yeah, so we headed to World's End, and World's End, for kind of like, like a visual context, is like a 500-foot vertical limestone rock face, which is a big... You kind of arrive at the road, it's the bottom of a valley, and you're looking up at this thing, and you've got like a 45-degree scree slope, which is kind of, big chunks of rock that over the course of time have tumbled off this mountain. And you've got to hike up that to get to the base of the cliff. Then when you're at the base, you're looking up, and you just sort of, like, bloody hell, like, shit, I've got to try and get to the top. And you work in a pair, and you climb what we refer to as pitches, which are kind of, like a section of rock, which might be
to the next and to
50 foot to a ledge.
Yeah.
And that ledge might be a couple of foot wide. You reset and you send up the next guy, and you kind of take it in turns. So we start at the bottom of World's End. We're kind of, spending this beautiful summer's day, climbing a couple of different routes, getting all the way to the top, coming back down. And then, to the point where it's like minutes before my accident, we're 3/4 of the way to the top of World's End, and there's like a 50-foot pitch. And that was kind of our final bit, and we were done for the day. And we stood on a ledge that's no wider than me to you, so less than 6 foot wide. And I kind of look up at my start point, and it's this crack that runs vertically to the top. And you would kind of use that crack and you would like lean against it to kind of like shimmy yourself up. And I kind of look at Matt and I say, right, I'll lead this one. And I start, and a couple of difficult minutes of grunting and not elegant climbing, but I get to the top. And I think one of the things I always loved about climbing was that moment of being at the top. And you just look down at this little, small, but to you, highly significant part of the world that you've just overcome fear. And I was always scared of heights, always. But it was like, how can you learn to calm that, calm the heart, calm your breathing in those moments where you do feel a little bit vulnerable? And I think that's what I've like really got the buzz from. But I'm stood at the top. I look down at my best mate. I stick a thumb up. I'm still on the rope, so he's still protecting me. And it's now my job to protect him as he climbs up to me. So I kind of set up a point where I can safely anchor myself to the rock, and I can lower the rope down, and I'm belaying him. So Matt tries 1, 2, 3 times to get up this crack, but he sort of, he's I was quite like a runner climber build, so quite skin and scrawny, where Matt's a Navy bomb disposal guy. So he's got a bit more kind of like muscle on him. So on the third attempt, we kind of say, look, well, but you stay there. I'll come back down to you. So I'm just in the process of rigging up a point where I can abseil back down to him, run the rope through, and we're done. And I kind of like walk myself back to that drop, to the edge of the cliff face I'm stood on. And I always remember just looking over my shoulder down at Matt below, who's 50 foot below me. And I just then turn to face forward. So I'm turning and I'm looking towards like safety, towards you. And it's as I turn and look ahead that I hear this crack. And it's a sort of crack that I've heard in the mountains before. You just don't want to be anywhere near it because it
means
often signifies something's dropping or something's coming from above. And I hear this crack, and all of a sudden I feel like the ground beneath my feet drop, and it must drop by a foot, but stops. And like my heart is going absolutely mad. And in my head, I was like, I thought I was going to die. I was like, thank God I'm all right. And that rock must have dropped by that foot, stopped for a second, just long enough for me to think, whew. And it's as I kind of let that breath out that all of a sudden that 4 foot by 2 foot chunk of World's End just completely collapsed beneath my feet, with me stood very much in the middle of it, with no time or warning to do the heroic Hollywood jump forward or jump sideways. And all of a sudden I've gone from like a position of security and pride and joy to this position of complete fear, because in my head the mental calculation is there's 500 foot beneath you, and what are the chances of you hitting anything and staying on it and surviving? So for those next couple of seconds, which in my reality felt like minutes, because there's some really interesting research, about how in moments of near-death experiences, the brain can extend time in the way that it's sort of like you experience it, because the brain is trying to figure, based on my prior experience to this point, what can I do to help me right now? So my brain is running through all of the kind of like ways in which, what could it do to avert what's about to happen? And the answer is nothing. So for those couple of seconds, all I think about are the people in my life I'm not going to see again, like my mum, my dad, my sister, my girlfriend, Matt. And it was just this list of people. It wasn't material objects. It wasn't holidays I'd gone on or things that were left unfulfilled. Climb Everest one day. It was just these people that I could see very visually and just think, shit, I never got to say bye. I never got to say I love you. And some of these people, you leave conversations with people in an argument, and all of a sudden you've got that regret that you didn't, apologize or say I love you when you hung up the phone the last time. And I hit that ledge, and I sort of land on that ledge flat on my back, slam into it with enough force that it doesn't stop me. I'm just going to keep going. And I've got that distance between me and you to tumble before I slip again. And there's another 450 foot, and I'm done. And it's as I'm tumbling from me to you, and I'm trying to like brace my body, that I don't realize at the point, but there's nothing I can do below my chest. So all that I'm trying to do is brace with my hands, and it's not stopping me from moving. And tumble. I shut my eyes because I know I'm just going to fall again. And it's as I shut my eyes, I feel this real intense like slam pressure on my chest, and all of the wind's been knocked out of my lungs for the second time in a matter of seconds. And I feel like I've stopped. And I open my eyes, and it's like my best friend's body is on top of me. And he had been stood, to one side, had avoided being hit himself by the rock, had seen me hit the deck, had seen me start to tumble, and he just did the one thing that he could do that would potentially save my life, and that was to put his body very much on the line. And he just sprinted from where he was stood, and he just said, in his recollection, just dove on top of me and almost tried to rugby tackle me to the floor, and just hoped that grabbing hold of me would be enough to stop me from slipping, when 80% of the chances that he'd grab onto me and we'd just both go off together. And yeah, and I think I've never forgotten that, and I will never forget that. He is a hero, my best friend, the man that saved my life. And all of these things that have happened since, we talk about being parents and things, none of this would have happened if he hadn't made a split-second decision to put his body on the line for me. And that was the start of 3 hours, waiting for rescue. It was about an hour, waiting for the Coast Guard helicopter another hour. And in total, it was 3 really kind of like vulnerable, scared hours, because I knew pretty quickly I couldn't stand up. The first thing I went to do was just kind of brush myself off and kind of go, whew, that was something. And it was as I tried to stand up, I couldn't. And then by the time we'd called mountain rescue, and by the time they'd arrived, and by the time of my rescue 3 hours later, I think I knew that today was going to be a life-changing day, and I couldn't sort of feel or move below my chest. But I always remember making, Matt a promise and myself a promise that, whatever happens next, just don't let it beat you. And that didn't come from a place of like resilience or courage. It came from quite a vulnerable and scared place. And I think when, we were chatting about resilience before, and, our children and the lessons we want to give to them, I think there is sometimes a misconception that to be brave, to be courageous, or to be a resilient person, you've just got to feel it. Whereas actually, I think it's the ability to find those kind of promises in those difficult moments that makes you resilient. It's not kind of, lying on that ledge, did I feel like everything was going to be okay and I was strong enough to bear what was going to happen? Because the answer was no, or unknown. But still, it doesn't stop you from making that commitment to yourself and being accountable to your best mate, to yourself, and to all of those people that you thought about in those couple of seconds, that, this isn't the end of a life worth living.
Yeah. Darren, I don't think anyone's been on the podcast that has articulated a story so with such detail. I mean, just kind of visualizing almost what you were going through in those stages. Just to pick a few bits out of it though. So you can still really visualize that moment of shit, there's a problem with I'm falling, that element of almost brain slowing the process down. I've heard people talk about that before, of kind of things in slow motion a little bit. And when that incredible moment of your best friend, kind of being that, that grounding force of you being safe, but obviously knowing something different. What's kind of, where was your head in those first 3 hours? Because that you talk very often. You mentioned to me before about that there's a problem. You can't feel anything from your. There's a significant injury. How quickly were you at that time at all thinking about how to process that, and like what does that mean?
No, I think there's some interesting research around like the change curve and how we experience things, and that ultimately starts with denial. And then you move sort of into anger, and there's a process before you get to acceptance. And I reckon in those 3 hours, I did like a loop-the-loop. I was corkscrewing from denial. Initially, it was kind of, I'm in shock, and I'm just in shock. And if I give this long enough, I'm going to stand up. And we actually held off on calling for rescue, because I was just determined I was going to be all right.
Yeah, give it a few minutes.
Because it happens to other people.
Yeah.
Like everything. Like you hear about car crashes that happen to someone else. And for me, it was like, I've heard about people breaking their backs and climbers that have been seriously injured. And I was like, that's someone else. You kind of have this like mid-20s, feel of, just you're not vulnerable to things. And then as those minutes kicked on, and like I've got a scar that I can show you in a bit that runs from my kind of middle of my forearm all the way to the top of my shoulder. Because as I was falling, I had an arm out, and that arm clearly contacted the rock face and just split my arm open. So in a way, I thought my biggest injury was my arm, because I'm bleeding out. I'm bleeding on the ground. We can see that, and that's sort of like a lot of attention's on that. And my back break doesn't really hurt at this point, because I think of that this level of adrenaline, and it's as those minutes come, tick by, that doesn't stop hurting, but the pain in my back starts to, and like I'm just lying there consciously trying to just wiggle a toe. Because initially I was trying to move my entire leg, and I was like, maybe moving my entire leg is a bit much, so let's just wiggle a toe. And then half an hour later, I'm still not able to move anything. I know I can't feel it, so how can you move something you can't feel? And that Matt gets his phone out. And then there was this wave of, I'll be all right. Whatever happens, I'm going to be all right. And then a wave of kind of, when Mountain Rescue turned up, and all of a sudden you've got someone really caring and empathetic over you. It's kind of like, right, Darren, you're going to be okay. Then you start hearing the chatter around you, where you're lying on your back looking at this beautiful blue sky, but you've got this team of professionals around you that are talking about you, not to you, and they're thrown in terms like potential spinal cord injury, no movement in legs, and it all feels really clinical in that moment, that I felt so out of control.
Yeah.
Because, I was dictated to by what they said, where I was moved to. Right, we've got to wait an hour for the Coast Guard helicopter to get here, because it's the only helicopter that can get to you where you are. And we're going to fly you to a hospital. We don't know which one yet. So all of a sudden, I'm not asking you, what do you want to do tomorrow? Or like, how do you want to get to here? I was being told, and that was the first time in my life I'd been medically in trouble. And I think that's where that promise and commitment came, because I felt so out of control. I needed to take something back within my kind of like mental process of I own what's about to happen. If I can't decide where I'm going to go or what this injury is going to look like, I need to own the mental battle. So I kind of, and internally I was like, whatever happens, just don't give up. And it was said with a huge degree of fear and uncertainty as to whether I could be true to myself on that. I remember grabbing Matt, and he told me a couple of weeks later that in my head, I'd grabbed him and said, whatever happens next, just don't let me give up, mate. I'd apparently had 2 shots of morphine by this point. So as I opened my mouth, it was just all complete like dribble. But like the best mate he is, just kind of like looked at me and nodded and was like, of course. And a couple of weeks later was like, what did you tell me on that day? So, it was a real wave of emotion.
Truth comes out at times like that, though, as well.
Exactly.
So, you've had the injury, you then airlifted to a hospital. Kind of first recollections of, there's a part that we've spoken about, and obviously the notes from when we caught up was that you get feedback from the surgeon about what's going to be moving forward. Just tell us about that and how that unfolded for those first few days. I know somebody who broke their neck in a local MIA. And we would visit him quite often in the Sheffield Hospital.
Oh yeah,
the spinal unit there, and you talk about that mental resilience. I would very often, and still do, think about that. How going into traction. I don't think a lot of people know about the kind of the screws into the side of the head, weighted off the end of the bed to keep the spine straight, and for a long period of time. And I used to the mental resilience in those first early days, weeks, months, getting used to that must have been incredible. What do you remember of it?
So my recollection of the day of my accident ends when I'm put into sedation and I'm told I'm going through surgery. I then wake up the next day in intensive care after 9 hours, where they've kind of, as I'd hit that ledge, my back had broken into 2 clean pieces, and like the level of impact just completely severed my spinal cord. And the spinal cord is the thing that you can break your back, and then you can break your back. You could break your back without any impact on the spinal cord. But it's that spinal cord which is the message that relays everything from the brain to the rest of the body. And with breaks where there's a complete sever of that spinal cord, there's no hope of recovery. And I always remember waking up the next morning, kind of that classic, blurry eyes as you kind of like adjusting to that fluorescent light that's right above your bed. And like intensive care, for anybody that's listening or that's been in to visit someone in intensive care, it's a real stuffy, claustrophobic, suffocating environment where you're hearing not just the machines in your room and your own emotions and experience, but other people's. So I always remember coming around with somebody screaming in the background with this kind of like rhythmic beeping of what would have been my heartbeat on the monitor. And there was a guy stood at the end of my bed who happened to be the surgeon who operated on me. And he was sort of walking around the ward. He wasn't just waiting for me to wake up at the end of my bed for like 10 hours. And I remember him kind of sort of saying, how did I feel? I said, a little bit in pain. I felt really tired. And he kind of said, look, I'll be very real with what happened. I'll be very real with what I think your injury means for the rest of your life. And he just said it as it was. He didn't sugarcoat it. He kind of said, look, you've sustained a severe spinal cord injury at T6, which is around your kind of chest level. The level of the impact broke your back and severed your spinal cord. We've spent 9 hours sort of bolting titanium onto your spine to help it to fuse back together and to give you some stability. But he was like, but as for what it means for the rest of your life, I'm really sorry, but you are going to be paralyzed for the rest of your life. And I kind of, he was like, do you have any questions? And my first question was, if I rehab really hard, is there any chance that I'll be back on my feet?
Because your initial mindset is that, so it's an injury I've got to get over.
Yeah.
As in, just, I broke my leg, I learned to walk properly again in terms of the building muscle. If I try really hard at it, I'll be okay though,
Mind
right?
over matter, that kind of thing. And it shows a huge degree of naivety about the complexity of spinal injuries. Whereas before, I would have seen somebody in a wheelchair. I'm so embarrassed to say it, but if they told me they were paralysed, my thought would have been, well, what are you doing to try and walk again? Whereas, what he was saying to me is that, look, you could, he did, these were his almost exact words, you could spend the next year in rehab or the next 4 years chasing something that you're never going to achieve. And he was like, so what I want to encourage you to do is to come to terms with what's happened and what that means for the rest of your life, but to learn to look ahead and to the doors that have just opened to you, and not over your shoulder to the doors that have just closed. Because he was like, if you spend the next year looking that way, there's so much you're going to miss out on. He was like, I know it won't feel like it right now, and I know that what I'm saying isn't what you want to hear, but look ahead. And I never saw him again. I think he'd operated on me. He wasn't, on the ward as such. But as much as I was in denial and I was like, no, I'll prove you wrong, and I'm going to, I needed to come to terms with it before I could kind of really resonate with what he said. But as I started to move from, after intensive care into the start of kind of spinal rehab, where you've got 6 weeks of lying flat on your back in bed, you're totally, immobilized, you're just looking up at the ceiling, everything's being done for you, and you can't move because this part of the body needs to heal and the swelling needs to go down on the spinal cord, whatever it might be. And it was during that 6 week period, I thought more and more about look ahead, not look behind.
Yeah.
And then the Paralympics were on TV. So for 2 weeks of the 6 weeks, on my little 4-inch monitor that I had like in front of my bed over my head, I had like 2 weeks worth of people that, the presenter would be like, and now we have David, had a car crash in 2010, started wheelchair racing 4 years later, is now the world champion representing Great Britain, gold medal favourite. And I could like really, understand David's experience. And David, he's a fictitious person, I guess I'm making up in this as an example, but David was showing me what was possible. And he was showing me that, and I always remember watching somebody get out of a wheelchair, get onto like a pontoon, get into a rowing boat, and then just disappear. And I was being told by, physios and OTs, I was going to be wheelchair bound and dependent on a wheelchair for moving around for the rest of my life, which really didn't sit with me and fit with the way I wanted to live my life. I didn't want to be bound to anything. And all of a sudden I've got these people on TV that are rowing, swimming, wheelchair racing, hand biking. And I was like, this is it. This is the doors that have opened. So I took real empowerment and inspiration from people I'd never heard of before that suddenly were my icons because they were showing me what was possible.
You talk about that kind of those 2 weeks of the Paralympic. You bought a kayak whilst you were in hospital, right?
I must have a bizarre world record for the only person to.
What have you done today? Well, interestingly,
we're laughing now. It started with a negative. So it started with I'd done 4 months of rehab, and rehab for me resembled a lot about the SAS reserve selection process, where you're kind of always being asked, you never know when enough is going to be enough. You never know when it's going to end. You never know what you're expected to achieve. And if you do it, they'll want you to do it again. You get to the top of a mountaintop, you give them your number, your name, and they just give you a grid reference to the mountaintop you just come from. And it's all a test. Can you keep your feet moving when pain and tired and, you're feeling it? And rehab was kind of like that. You'd be on the floor, physio would be like, right, I want you to get back into your wheelchair. You've just fallen out in public. How are you going to do it? And you'd tremble your way back into your chair, arms shaking, exhausted. And your physio would look at you. I had brilliant physios called Amy and Kate. And they would just be like, that's good, do it again. And you're back on the floor, pushing back up. And you're always being asked to go one further tomorrow, one further the next day. And I was 2 weeks from my discharge, and I kind of had like this plan for what my life was going to look like. And I was in a relationship with a girl that I thought was the one person I was going to marry, have kids with. And she came in 2 weeks before my discharge and just kind of said, I could tell something was wrong. And she just said, like, I wanted to say this so much sooner, but it just never felt like the right thing to do. And I'm really sorry, and I don't want to tell you, but I just don't think I can be your person through this. And I don't think that I love you enough to stay with you and to help you to, come to terms with what's happened. And I'm really sorry, but I just needed to tell you, and I don't know what to do. She burst into tears. And all of a sudden, the person that you think unconditionally loves you is sat across from you, telling you that they don't love you enough to get through this with you. And that absolutely broke me. 100%, that promise that I made at World's End of whatever happens next, I never thought I would have to face losing the person that I loved more than anybody else in the world. And I gave up. I kind of, I didn't go to rehab the next few days. I just wanted to shut the world away, didn't want to be there. And I was mentally at my lowest point I've ever been and ever will be. And it was Kate, my physio, who kind of came into me, and she was like, look, I know what's happened and I get it. And I know there's nothing I can say it's going to make you feel better. But she was like, can you do one thing for me? Remember the person that you want to become. Because before that breakup, I had this image in my head. And she was like, remember the person you want to be 4 years from now, because you've told me. Remember him. Never forget who you want to be. And tell you what, think about him there 4 years from now, retrace his steps right here, right now, heartbroken in this hospital. And you tell me what the first thing he did was to get from here to there. And she was like, think about it and do it and tell me. And she kind of like, left me on my own, sobbing behind my blue curtain. I'd sort of, pulled around my bed. And I got my phone out and I called up Matt and I said, there's something I need to do and I need you to just to come and do it with me. Don't try and talk me out of it. And he was like, all right. So he turns up, I give him the postcode for a kayak and a canoe store, which is 2 hours from hospital. And he doesn't question it. We drive to this thing. I go up to the guy behind the counter. I'm like, hi, I'm here to buy a kayak. And he's like, brilliant. What kind of kayak are you after? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, how much kayaking have you done? And I was like, none. And he was like looking at me and he was like, without causing offense, do you know if you can kayak? And I was like, I've got absolutely no idea. Like my core muscles don't work, my leg muscles don't work, but I was determined. So I bought this brand new blue sea kayak, a paddle, a buoyancy aid, anything this guy told me I needed, I bought it. And Matt stood next to me and said, well, if you're doing it, I'm doing it. So he bought a red kayak to match my blue one. We turn up back at hospital a few hours later. I rush in, I find Kate. I get Kate to come out to the car park. I point to the roof of Matt's car. And I'm like, I don't think I say ta-da, but that's the what I'm aiming for. And I point to his car. Kate sees what's on the roof, looks at me, and just very deadpan just sort of says, please tell me that's not yours. And I'm like grinning like a Cheshire cat, so proud of myself. And Kate was like, you're an idiot. And I was discharged 2 weeks after that. And the very next day, on Christmas Eve, my friends had booked the local swimming pool. And for 2 hours, I had this opportunity to take that next step towards the man I wanted to be in 4 years' time. And by the time I got to the middle of a 25-metre swimming pool, I'd capsized 27 times. But every time I got a little bit further, I'd fall in. My mates and all my mates were in the water with me. Matt in his kayak, my friends Harry and Jack in the water as like safety divers. My family are on the sideline. My mum must have been having blooming kittens just watching me capsize over and over again, probably thinking she was going to watch her son drown as opposed to like fall to his death. But it was the start of a journey that I kind of, who I wanted to be 4 years from now was to be at the Paralympic Games in a kayak on TV, showing a version of me in hospital what was possible. And I never forgot that image. And what Kate said was so true. Like when your emotions take control and when your emotions are too strong, you've always got to default back to, but who do I want to be? And just take that next step. And if that next step is to do something, stupid, like buy a kayak, you do it. And actually, my first step was to ask for help, which was to call Matt, and that's not always easy. I think when we're going through stuff, we don't want to admit that we're hurt or struggling or that we're kind of at our lowest. And particularly us blokes, the whole manosphere stuff recently, you've just got to learn that asking for help isn't weakness. It is, humility and strength. So, yeah,
I think you can apply what you've just said to, like what we talked about, didn't we, in the week? That you can apply that to a lot. I think that's a beautiful way of envisaging it, where you feel lost, rock bottom, whatever it may be. Where do you want to get to? And you mentioned a couple of times during this morning is, but it starts with a step.
Yeah.
It starts with a little bit. It starts with that first time that you fell off that kayak in a swimming pool, and then 27 times later you're at the middle, but you're at the middle.
Yeah.
You've done it now. I think you can apply that to so many more things.
Yeah.
You didn't just stop there though, right? The kayak led to way more. You began a process of kind of getting more involved with veterans and leading people on different kind of expeditions and so on.
Yeah.
One of which is you led a group of veterans from Land's End to John O'Groats, which when I watched some of the details about you, some of the YouTube stuff on you, Darren, right? I don't know why, but I thought, fucking hell, that's gonna 7 days tops, right? That's a lot of time to be at sea. It's way more than that, isn't it? Just talk us through why did you want to do that? What was it like?
It goes back to the 4-year image thing. So from, like you say, from a swimming pool to a canal to a river to a lake to the Paralympic team, where 3 months after I left hospital, I turned up thinking that I was like going to show them what I had.
Great news, guys. Your gold medalist is here.
You found him. He's here. And I turned up at this trial day and I absolutely sucked. I was upside down more than I was the right way up. But I never quit. I kept getting back in, pushing off again. And they must have thought, like, this guy's total shit. But you know what? The head coach, a guy who's a multi-Olympian, said to me at the end of the day, he was like, what I can't doubt is your mindset. So we want to bring you back. And over the course of the next few months, I went from like falling in every 2 seconds to every 2 minutes to finishing a 200-meter sprint. And then over the next 3 years, it was like this build-up from being the worst in the UK in my classification, not even finishing a race, to finishing 4th or 3rd or 2nd, and chasing this kind of like elusive 4-year goal of being at the Paralympics. And only one person was going to represent GB, and I was number 2. And sometimes in life we don't find that final half a second, and sometimes we fall short and we fail. And whether that's a job interview or a business idea or whatever it may be, sometimes things don't go to plan. But it's kind of in that period of time afterwards where there's a little bit of uncertainty. It's like, well, how do you redirect that focus and determination into something to make something of everything that you've just done, that effort? So I didn't want to let all of that effort of training and working my ass off to achieve something go to waste. And I think I genuinely sat at home on my laptop thinking, right, in a year's time, the Paralympics is going to be on TV. And I'm not ready just to sit at home and watch and wonder classic, like, what if it had been me? How would I have done? So I kind of sat on Google Maps. I zoomed out a bit more. Then I had the coastline of the UK, kind of that, that image in my head. And I don't know why, but I just kind of looked at like Cornwall, looked at Scotland, and I went, I wonder. And I Googled, and like it hadn't really been done. And I know that people have run it, cycled it, swum it. So I came up with this idea, and I spoke to a couple of friends I met through a really brilliant veterans charity called the Armed Forces Para Snow Sports Team, who, because of them, I'd been back in the mountains on a set of skis, you know, surrounded by snow and like that camaraderie that I'd loved about mountaineering. And I called up 4 of the people I'd met that we'd one night in Norway talked about kind of dreams that we'd love to do one day. And all of those individuals were talking about big adventure as something they'd love to do. So I just pitched them the idea. I kind of knew so little. It was like, right, lands into John O'Groats. I reckon it's about 1,400 kilometres. I reckon it will take us about a month. And we could do it for the charity. What do you reckon? And the 4, Ben, Carl, Johnny and Luke, that had each had life-changing injuries, you know, a brain bleed, stood on an ID, shot 7 times. This isn't all the same person. This is like 3 of them. Yeah, that's really unlucky. Carl's really unlucky. And then, you know, spinal problems. So we were like the most unlikely of individuals. And we announced to the world we were going to do this expedition. First team to do it. First, you know, let alone disabled, able-bodied people to do it. And everybody wrote us off. Like everybody kind of was like, love the enthusiasm, love the idea, but it ain't you 5. You know, like you do not have the kind of prerequisite experience or skill or talent or name your thing. And a year of planning, preparing, and it's like this ownership test. Like we all knew that each person in that team was doing everything they possibly could to be ready, whether that was planning and prep or research or training. You know, for me, I was trying to like improve my balance. Sea kayaking is completely different to like kayaking on a lake, doing a 200 meter sprint. You've got waves and swell that can pick up wind. And then, you know, we're on our start line and we're sort of like 2 kilometers offshore of the backdrop of Land's End. And you've got these towering like 300-foot cliffs on the shipwreck coast of Cornwall. And you're at the start line of this however long journey it's going to be, which ultimately would be 26 days for us. And you're doing 50, 60, 70 kilometers a day, out at sea for 10, 11 hours, you know, maybe up at 4 a.m. to catch the tide in the right direction, pushing our disabilities and our abilities to the absolute limit. And for me, it was like the kind of, you know, a slight added pressure of having come up with the whole idea and been the kind of like expedition leader. You kind of think, well, what is leadership? Like, how do I act as a leader? And I remember my first 5 minutes of that first day, the only thing I was thinking about was like, I need to look good. I need to be the best to be a leader. That's kind of like the kind of formula of being a leader. And like 5 minutes into day one, I'm really battling to stay the right way up. You've got these waves that are picking me up, putting me down. And 5 minutes in, I just catch my paddle wrong and I'm in. And I'm upside down. And I just remember the feeling of like, you're an absolute idiot as I'm underwater. And I kind of like come back up. But then suddenly found this renewed sense of determination and perseverance that no matter how many times this was going to happen, I'm not going to give up. So I kind of like, you know, with help, we stabilised the kayak and I dragged myself back onto the seat and I got my bum in, which is really impressive when you can't move your bum to achieve that in waves.
Just what's the roll called?
Oh no, we didn't do one of those. I was out.
But you know what I mean? It's
Eskimo
like
roll.
An Eskimo roll. I mean, if you don't mind me saying, you know, like you say, fully able-bodied is such a tremendous core-sapping thing to try and do, right? It's not just, I'm upright again. It is so incredibly difficult.
Yeah. So I was out, so there was no way you were rolling it. I was like in the water.
Oh, right.
So I like just managed to grab myself and pull myself back in, just about to pick my paddle up, another wave hit, knocked me straight back in. And like 4 times later, you're kind of like, no, I'm going to do this. But it was just the start of this journey of like overcoming the self-doubt, overcoming the kind of pressure of being a leader means you have to be the best. I think for me, I learned that leadership is just leading by example. And that it's like you set the example of, for me, it was probably going to be perseverance, that, you know, it's not always going to go to plan. And I think for us as a 5, you know, we would finish every day exhausted. Like we were so lucky that we were like adventuring along this beautiful Cornwall coastline, Devon coastline, but we had some real moments where things could have gone one of 2 ways and the expedition could have been over. There's a point as you've just sort of left Cornwall, you're coming into Devon, and it's called Mort Point, and Mort being the French word translated into English is death. So it's Death Point, and you're just approaching it, and on the horizon you can just see these like waves crashing against black rock on the right and black rock, like this sort of island that's appeared from the sea on the left, and you've got to punch straight through it. And like everybody, the support boat behind us, the cameras, you watch it, and even the camera trying to like capture what's going on is being battered in one direction and another. And there were just so many moments along that where I think the only thing that kept us going was why we were doing it, was this bigger purpose and our why, and not the kind of like, we want to do a world record expedition.
Yeah.
The kind of like
There's a deeper thing there.
There's a deeper thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't rest there either, which is some of the interesting part of your resilience and your focus. I've checked this so many times. You are the first person in a wheelchair to complete 7 marathons in 7 days in 7 continents.
Yeah, it was pretty.
That is fucking phenomenal.
It was a pretty fun.
And I just wanted, before I ask you about, just to talk me through the idea and then some of the bits that you key remember in it. But when you arrived, you do the first one in Antarctica, right?
Yeah.
I'm right in saying it's minus 22?
It was minus, I think, 30 when we landed.
60-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah.
So I've watched you get off that plane. Like, honest to God, the interesting thing, to nowhere near the same extent at all, Darren, is like when I've done anything that's got long endurance and so on and so forth, the 3 Peaks, 24 hours, the 112-mile bike ride, those sort of things, there is a moment in time in those that my mental space has gone to a pretty average low space of I can't get past that. You do, and there's different kind of ways to go about going and do that. But if you can, as you tell us about this journey that you went through, how many of those have you had in that time of doing this, and how do you overcome them? Because I don't want people to listen to this and go, yeah, all right, well, he's an adventurer, and he's in doing his 4th continent, 4th marathon, 4th day of doing it. He's built differently, but it isn't, because at the same time, that same person, as you quite rightly just mentioned, got in a swimming pool and started for the first time kayaking in rehabilitation from a spinal injury, lost the quote at the time, kind of person you're going to spend the rest of your life with. So just kind of, if you can give us some instances within this journey of fuck, I'm not going forward here.
So I think important point to make is there's no talent, at least in this half of the conversation. As discussed, things, Lands and John Groats came about through a failure, through repeated failure of learning to kayak, and then the failure of qualifying for the Paralympics, and the dream going the way I wanted it to. And from my dream of, being the teacher, climber, Everest summiter, SAS reservist, that not working as well in the direction I'd hoped. But I think all of those things taught me something, which was that even when things don't go to plan, and if we fall short or we fail, that doesn't mean that there's not something great beyond it. It doesn't mean that there's something that you can be proud of that you will achieve because of this experience and because of the way that you've been sharpened by adversity or, challenges in our lives. So for me, when we got back from John O'Groats, I was like on top of the world, absolutely on top of the world. And I suddenly could see what I've just said. I could see that something good comes from having an ambition and going for it and chasing it wholeheartedly. And you know what? Being okay with the fact that some things don't work out, but you just bounce forward. You don't stop momentum. You just keep going. So I was home for a couple of months, and I was thinking about, right, what direction does life go in? And I get this phone call from the guy that organises the World Marathon Challenge, the 777, and he was like, "Look, Darren, I've heard your name because of the kayak expedition. And I'm looking for somebody who's a wheelchair user to be the first person to do the 777 to prove it can be done. And it would really help me open it to a whole new audience. Are you interested?" And I was like, yeah, great. It's like, what do I need to do? When are we talking? All of that stuff. And he said, well, it's in 10 months' time. And all I really need to know from you is, are you in? And what's your current marathon PB? And that's where the phone call went a little bit quiet, because I was like, shit.
Good news, yes.
Good news.
Interesting second answer.
Exactly, yeah. Interesting.
I don't know yet.
Yeah. I've done one when I was walking, when 10 years earlier on 2 legs. And I was like, I'm really sorry, I've not done a marathon. And I was like, I commit to you right now, I'll do everything I can to be ready. But if you need someone who's like a proven, experienced marathon runner that can give you an answer, then I completely understand. And he kind of said, no, you know what? Like, I'll see you 10 months from now. And that is kind of how it transpired. I remember like turning around telling my partner, and she was like, "You haven't done a marathon." I was like, "I know." And I was like so like over the top enthused by something I'd never done. I remember going out for my first run, which was like 5 miles, and I thought my arms were going to fall off because it is its own. You know, they sort of say to be cycle fit, you need to cycle. It's like a specific fitness thing.
Yeah,
it's
anything like that with a duration is a real technique, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And your momentum is by your gearing a wheel in front of you, aren't you? You're kind of moving pedals around for those people not watching. It's
what's the word? Biomechanical. It's not very natural.
That's right. Yeah.
So to do that for 7 days, and don't forget, like you do your marathon, it's not like I then just hop onto my legs and walk off and rest my shoulders. You're constantly using the same muscle group that you need for the 26.2 miles. So we arrive in Antarctica, day one, it's minus 30, wind speed 60 mile an hour, and we've got like a 6-hour window to do it. And they're like, we then need to take off. And that was like the most bruising 6 hours of my life. You know, going into a 60 mile an hour headwind, you're just moving so painfully slow. And all of the able-bodied runners, there was like a Red Bull athlete there who was just a bit of a show-off. He was a great guy, but just too good. And then for me, it was just being lapped and just watching people go past me. And I think to try and answer your question about some of the things I learned, it was like, initially I was letting everybody that passed me that kind of went, keep going, Darren. I took it negatively. I took it as like a sign that I wasn't doing well enough or I was struggling. And then I decided, I was like, you know what? I'm fighting my own battle here. I'm my own person. I'm different to Mr. Red Bull runner. I'm different to, you know, the guy from Colorado who's run 100 marathons in 100 countries. And just stay in your own lane, fight your own fight. You're not competing. I'm here to finish. I'm not here to finish ahead of X person or Y person. And at the end of those 6 hours, I finished with 10 minutes to spare. And then they started like picking people off the course and saying, we are taking off, we're going. And then we fly to Cape Town. We do the marathon in Cape Town, plus 30 degrees the next day. Just exhausted from day one, everything hurt. And I was like, right, once again, remind yourself of why you're doing it. You know, for me, there's always got to be a bigger purpose, a charitable purpose, a message that you're trying to send. We finished day 2, and then we're on our way to the airport, and the flight's cancelled. And all of a sudden, we have a 24-hour delay in South Africa that isn't built into the schedule. And everybody is there like sort of, is it done on day 2? Because 7 days is only 168 hours. And they were like, right, we can still do it, but it means for the next 4 days, we've got to do 5 marathons.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Like, it got even more whistle-stop tour, no rest for the wicked. And by the time we got to Dubai on day 4, I was just at a real low point. I was physically exhausted, mentally drained. You don't sleep well, you don't eat well. And then we were on the start line of by the kind of famous sail hotel, the Burj Al Arab, or something like that. And I was just like, all right, here we go, another 26.2 miles. It's hot. And all of a sudden, this local lad on an e-scooter pulls up alongside me. And he must be a teenager, probably 14, looks down at me, points to himself and says, Mohammed, points to me, and I say, Darren. And he's like, Darren, you win. And I think he was like saying, you're going to win this marathon. And we set off, and he like matches my pace. And every now and then, clearly, like, I don't speak much Arabic. His English was limited to Manchester United, Darren, and you win. So 4 basic sentences, I guess. And he followed me for about 12 miles. And then his scooter ran out of battery. Great range for an e-scooter. And all he did was run up to another one, rent another one, and catch me up. And he stayed with me for 26.2 miles. Wow. And he, at the end of that race, just sort of said goodbye, peeled off into the distance and disappeared. And it was kind of like an emotional reset of like, I'm lucky to be doing this. And I think perspective is something I've really learned through my journey. You know, even going through intensive care and rehab, it was like, how lucky are you to see those people that you thought you never were going to see again? And in those difficult moments that we all experience, it is hard sometimes to find that different lens through which you can look at something and turn a setback into an opportunity, or to turn a difficult moment into a moment of gratitude. But we can all do it, you know, and we can all remind ourselves of why we should be grateful. And for me, Mohammed was just this brilliant, funny, you know, example of why adventure is great, because you meet people you never would have met. and how, you know, people are instrumental in your success, and that we don't succeed alone. And even though Mohammed was not a formal part of my team for that event, he was in so many ways the person that kind of, you know, got me through that real hump day.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Incredible how those are moments arrive in lives, isn't it? For sure. I said to you, you know, I think David Smith has been one for me that he's been on the show, and he definitely gave me a new perspective on life. Interestingly, that I found myself kind of navigating away from, and then being surprised at why I feel the way I'm feeling again. And it's, you know, just hearing you talking now, I'm just kind of like, yeah, there's a different course that doesn't necessarily need to be kind of the natural way that you think you're going to live, and so on and so forth. Sure. And maybe it shouldn't be, because that's your greater purpose almost.
And life, David knows this, and I know it. Life isn't linear. You know, just because we experience one bad thing doesn't mean that life is just on that upward trajectory. You know, we are going to have those dips and those moments of unforeseen adversity that kind of take us back down to ground zero, and it's like, oh, I've got to rebuild from the ground up again. You know, for me, like, the accident was one, losing my partner was one, losing my dad was one, and, you know, all of these kind of setbacks. And it's sometimes easy to feel deflated, and you need to look at people like David and kind of, you know, let someone else give you a perspective that sometimes you can't see yourself.
Yeah.
And you talked about your friend who broke their neck. And for me, I always remember in rehab being on my ward of people that have broken their backs, and then there was like a ward next to it where people have broken their necks. And the resilience in that ward was like, you couldn't help but be inspired, because you would go in and all of a sudden you're in a conversation with someone where just the ability to do this, to wiggle your fingers, you were so fortunate to be able to do that. And I would, you know, speak to people like your friend and just take so much like empowerment from them and strength from their resilience. So we all need people in our lives to help us, you know, think differently.
Darren, I could talk to you all day about those different things. There is, but just before we kind of close a little bit, you know, we spoke on the phone this week, and one thing I just wanted to ask you about, you mentioned some of the things that you want to kind of focus on going forward, and you mentioned about men's mental health, the reality of the kind of big trigger of you wanting to do that was that unfortunately your dad took his own life 4 years ago. Tell us about what you're doing, and tell us what you want to try and achieve, and why in that space.
Yeah. So part of the bio you read on my website was speaker, and that was never intended. Like, teaching isn't speaking. I wanted to teach because it's like sharing a passion. Whereas speaking about your story is very vulnerable, because you're up on the stage, you're telling people about your journey in the hope that they like connect with your story. And for me, I had no interest in being a speaker. And then I lost my dad, and my dad had, you know, ever since my accident, had really struggled with his mental health, and he was one of those men that probably wouldn't ask for help. And in my dad, I saw how that kind of inner battle is so much tougher than the external physical one. You know, those mental scars are slower to heal than the physical scars. And I wanted nothing more than to help my dad, but I didn't know how. And I think it's because it was too late by the time I realized that he desperately needed help and he was struggling. And I always remember my dad looked after my dog so I could go out on a dinner date with my partner. And I picked up my dog after dinner, and my dad came out and put the dog in the car, and he just went to go straight back inside without saying goodbye. He was clearly off, you know, he clearly just wasn't feeling himself. And I remember pausing and like hitting my horn and winding down my window and just saying something that I never said enough to my dad, which was, you know, like, Dad. And I got his eye and I was like, you know, I love you. And he said, I love you too, son. And turned around, went inside, and I never saw my dad again. The next morning, my sister called me and said he'd been found dead at home. And it was, you know, not suspicious. It was overdose. And I just felt like I'd failed my dad. And I felt like I had an opportunity to help people like him by sharing a story of overcoming difficult moments and mental adversity, and like to be very honest about it, not be Ant Middleton and be up on stage, but I'm really tough. Oh, I shouldn't take the piss out of him, should I? He's got lots of followers. But you know what I mean? Like to be overly alpha to go up on stage and just be real and just be like, you know what, this happened, it sucked, it hurt, but this is what the surgeon said that changed my life. This is what Kate said that changed my life. This is what I learned at this point. And all of these things have added up into a sort of like toolbox of stuff that I can dip into when I need to, when I'm feeling at my lowest point. And I just thought, what if Dad had gone to a conference and someone had done that? And that's why I started speaking. And that's where, you know, losing my dad, I suddenly realised how, you know, that mental health conversation has really improved over the last 5 years. But we still need to push it, because the leading cause of death in men under 45, not that my dad was under 45, he was 60, shouldn't be death. Shouldn't be suicide. You know, it just shouldn't be.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, that's why I speak, and yeah, it's a driving purpose for me.
Yeah.
Really.
I always cry on these episodes. I'll try and get through what I'm going to say in a most coherent way possible. But you mentioned at the start about like your life when you were walking, that what your planned trajectory was, or what your planned kind of life was going to be. It was kind of you know, set out in stone. You kind of could see what you were going to be and what you weren't going to be, and I think a lot of people may look at those things and go, well, yeah, you know, that's what life's going to be, and it's going to be successful in that space. And then obviously your accident happened. I think, you know, most parents want nothing more for their children than to be proud of them.
You're going to make me cry. This is a problem.
I'm fucking rubbish at this. I'm so bad at this.
This is good. This is real.
Yeah.
This is a proper alpha male. I mean that.
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I can't get around it. I cry on every episode. Your dad would be incredibly proud of you.
Thank you.
And I hope you know that there are so many people out there that you have been a Muhammad to, right? There are people who will talk about the day they met Darren Edwards, with that moment of how he changed their life, because it's remarkable. Your kind of the way that you go about everything is a complete breath of fresh air, wheelchair bound or not. You're seeing how you approach things is really, really insightful, and I hope so many people take that resilience that you've demonstrated in so many things that you've done from the episode today. Before we close, Graft, you know the backstory of it and why it exists and where it came from, but just help kind of some of us understand, or give your thoughts on when times are really tough, which we all have. And that can be good, just getting out of bed in the morning. It doesn't have to be about buying a kayak and going from Land's End to John O'Groats, which is incredible. There are real struggles on the day-to-day life of everything. What should people do?
I just want to touch on the fact that you've a genius Muhammad reference, like be the Muhammad to someone else. That's such a good way of thinking about that story. Sorry, back to what you actually asked. I think for me, it's probably, I've learnt 4 or 5 things along the way that had life not changed, I don't think I could sit opposite you and have any form of conversation with like real belief that this was like a change moment for me. I think my accident taught me about ownership, that life is a big ownership test, and that when things happen, we want to be able to say and hold ourselves accountable that we did everything that we could to turn a negative into a positive. Because, you know, if you're going to chase a dream and fall short, that Paralympic kind of, you know, analogy there, in the fall short moment, or in the moment where it doesn't go to plan or things change, you want to be able to hold your head up high and be proud of yourself for doing everything that you needed to do and could do within your power to get from here to there, and then to have that moment of like pride, to allow yourself to be proud. And for me, it probably took to get into John O'Groats to have my first genuine moment of pride in myself. And I was probably far too harsh on myself up to that point, but I needed that moment and that signpost, you know, that said John O'Groats, to be like, I'm proud of who I am. And then there's the Kate thing of, even when you're at your lowest and you feel weak and scared and vulnerable and you just do not know what the next year, 5 or 10 is going to look like, don't lose sight of who it is that you want to be, what you want to stand for as a person. And I always remember that the clinical psychologist I worked with as I left hospital and just trying to do a bit of cognitive behavioural therapy, she said to me, Darren, tell me about you prior to your accident and what you wanted to stand for as a person. And, just tell me that. And I remember saying to her that, I wanted to teach because I wanted to share a passion with people, to help them to think differently, to inspire people. And it was about history. And I wanted to be a mountain leader, to share my passion for climbing with other people. And, I wanted to do the military stuff to prove that I could do difficult things. And she just sat opposite me and went, and why do you think you can't do all of those things in this new life? And I remember just taking a moment and being like, oh yeah. And we're 7, 8 years, 9 years later now. And I speak because I'm sharing a passion for mental health and with people that I'm hopefully inspiring if I do it well. I'm sharing my passion for adventure with people that have got disabilities through the charity that I form, which takes people that are in the first couple of years of life post-injury on adventures and shows them how capable they still are. And I still do things which challenge me and prove that I can be tough in difficult moments. So actually, my life hasn't changed at all. And I think, to answer your question, just in those moments, think about that question that she posed me and pose it to yourself. What do you want to stand for as a person and why can't you? Yeah.
Amazing. Darren Edwards, thank you so much for coming on the
Steve.
Graft podcast. It's been an incredible story to listen to and be a part of. It's a real privilege to have you on the show. We will be sharing all your details for people who listen that can get in touch and those looking for keynote speakers and those sort of things. It's an amazing story to share, but more so, as I say, it's the what you represent that I hope people take from today. And I've certainly learned an incredible amount. And so, sincerely, thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks.
That's a wrap on this week's Graft. Please make sure you follow the podcast from wherever you listen or watch from so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next week.